Živia from Ice Beta, and this is your host, Arena in Ljubljana, where hopefully I will be based for the foreseeable future. Yep, you heard that right. It's another episode from your favorite podcast all about gold medal ice climbing, mixed and dry tooling. We're now at episode 13, which means there's only 7 more left in season 1. But don't despair, they are all good ones. Today we chat with Kendra Stritch, who made history by becoming the first American to win a UIAA Ice Climbing World Cup medal in December of 2014, when she took gold on the speed climbing wall in Bozeman, Montana. Since then, Kendra has been a major force in developing dry tooling and competitive ice climbing in the US. She helped to formalize USA ice climbing under the auspices of the American Alpine Club, has organized countless comps around the country, and even was the first importer of speed tools in North America. A competitive athlete since she was 9, Kendra is drawn to the novelty and strategy of new sports ranging from alley cat bike racing to log rolling to kickball. She equally enjoys the camaraderie of fellow competitors and refers to the ice climbing scene as her World Cup family. Over the last few years, Team USA has been steadily improving on the world stage, and Kendra has played a vital role in getting the sport to where it is. We'll talk all about the hows and the whys in today's episode. But first, a word from our sponsor. Blue ice is the best kind of ice, and also my choice when it comes to fast and light ice climbing gear. The aerolites go in like hot knife through butter, and their climbing packs hit the sweet spot between function and lightweight. Designed to get to the point in the Alpine, their gear is tested by mountain professionals between the Alps and the Wasatch. If you're looking to get to the point too, and with a little less weight in your kit, check out Blue Ice's gear at blueice.com or your favorite local retailer. And a shout out to our supporters on Patreon. Folks like Anna, George, Laura, Dan, John, and many others have been instrumental in helping us get the podcast up and running. If you're enjoying the show, consider throwing a few Dyneema dog bones our way at patreon.com/icebeta. KK, cool. On to our chat with Kendra. Hey, Kendra. Thanks so much for joining Ice Beta.
Hey, Aaron. It's great to be here.
I'm really interested in chatting with you because you have a long history with Team USA ice climbing, and there's going to be a lot of interesting history and anecdotes. I'm excited to hear about it.
Great. I'm excited to share it.
You do a lot of organizing, and you just had a dry tooling comp at Turner's a few weeks ago. How did that go?
It was really awesome. We had 38 competitors, and it ranged from people that had never dry tooled before to World Cup team members. We had a whole contingent come out from Colorado to get some rope climbing in because they mainly train at the Coop in Boulder, the dry tooling gym, which is bouldering only. And it was just really awesome. Angela Limbach, who's a teammate on the World Cup team, she lives in Milwaukee. She has organized this now for 3 years. And last year and this year, I go down and help set and do everything. So we are super proud of the routes that we put up. We put up 16 routes for qualifiers. So it was just open climb format. And then we had a recreational finals, which was on top rope, and then the open finals, which was lead. And everybody climbed awesome and was psyched, and the energy was great.
I saw one of the finals routes, I think it was. It was a lot of traversing and then up an increasingly steep wall to the roof, right?
Yes, that was the open finals. They did a few bouldering moves to start, had to figure 4 across a hanging 4x4, and then got back onto another wall, went up a vertical section into some overhang and then across the roof and then back down into like an undercling and then a few more moves across. So that was, to make the length of the route challenging and everything. So we kind of have to be creative with the route setting that way for finals.
There is a contingent of dry toolers in the Midwest where you're based, and then you mentioned Boulder in Colorado already, and I know that there's folks in Seattle. Where are the dry toolers in the US? And for those that don't really know, like, what is dry tooling and what is dry tool competition?
Dry tooling is using, at a minimum, our ice tools, but really we've got specific developed tools these days, but originally it was using ice climbing tools on rock, or also what we do more modernly on holds that are specifically designed for dry tooling or rock climbing holds. And then also in many cases, we use our crampons. But when we're in the climbing gyms, we're generally using rock shoes. So it's really just become a sport where we use ice climbing like tools to climb on holds. So, and indoor dry tooling is not really mimicking outdoor dry tooling or ice climbing, but it's become its own unique, really fun sport that has a lot of unique movement to it. And it's hard to convey that on a podcast or just talking about it. So people should go Google Ice Climbing World Cup, and there's lots of videos from the competitions out there. And so you can see the holds and the movements that are really unique.
What do you think of the name dry tooling?
This is a conversation that comes up pretty often within our community. I have no problems with it. The East Coast apparently giggles a lot and thinks it's a very sexual name. But nobody has come up with a better name. So, and just calling it tooling, where I get when we're in the community that works, but it's even like more bizarre to try to for people outside of our community to try to understand what tooling is or anything. And then also just calling it indoor ice climbing, I don't think is right because it's a completely different sport from ice climbing. And we can mimic ice climbing indoors with foam and stuff, and that's different from dry tooling. So I think we have to stick with it, and I'm okay with that, but not everybody
I'm
loves the
from
name.
I'm from the East Coast, so I chuckle every time too.
I know. I don't it's so funny to me, but because it's like legit lots of people from the East Coast are the ones that are like, "Well, but it's sexual." And I'm like, I mean, I get where you're coming from, but that's not the first place my mind goes to, but
I'm partial to super bouldering, just sort of how it works out in my mind, because you get to do these huge, powerful moves, but also like really ticky tacky technical. And yeah, I just love the like power and finesse of it.
yeah, I mean, that's a great description other than I prefer to do it on a rope instead of bouldering, right? So we end up with that definition
Fair.
problem. And that's I mean,
That's
that's
fair.
just we can come up with lots of other unique ways like that, like super bouldering, but then it's also not quite right either. So it's a tough one to come up with a new name.
We need to hire a communications agency to get on top of this.
Absolutely. Yeah, anyone out there that has a background that wants to come up with a new name, we're open.
You're sure not to appease anybody. It's
True.
probably the result. Um, well, so speaking of competitions, you've actually been a competitive athlete since you were 9. We'll talk about some of the sports you were competing in, but what is it about competitions that you enjoy?
I really love the aspect of competition where it's about how you show up and perform on that given day with the conditions and the other people that showed up, and then it's done. There's a commitment factor there that I have described as being, run out over your gear, no fall terrain, and you just have to perform. Competition is that same feeling and commitment without the risk of being run out over your gear. Because but you only have one chance, right? You fall and you're done in competition. So, like, you have to fight for it, and in general, the competitions are safe. So, you still have that commitment, but without the risk.
What are some of the sports you've competed in your life?
Well, I started with slalom ski racing, grew up in the suburbs of Minneapolis, and we produce more slalom ski racers at the World Cup and Olympic level than any other state does. And mostly because our biggest ski hills are 1,000 feet invert. And We have a lot of icy conditions, and the fun thing to do here is run gates. It's not free ski. So you get really good at running those gates because that's what you do. And so I started that when competing when I was 9 and did that into college. But along those same years, I was competing in track. I was a sprinter and tennis and everything. And my mom told me in 6th grade that I had to join a team sport because I did all these individual sports. She was a little concerned about my teamness, and I basically refused. And so she signed me up for soccer and dropped me off at soccer. So I played soccer for a couple years, I guess through junior high. And then when I was in 10th grade, my high school had a rugby team that had just started a couple years, and I fell in love with rugby. So I played rugby all through high school and college, and for 5 years after college as well, and played on the Premier League for women in the US and loved that. So that was kind of school sports. But outside of that, I've done triathlons, cyclocross, road biking alley cats, which are like, navigation around the city on your road bike. They're pretty informal. It might be a Minnesota thing. Orienteering, trail running, adventure racing, log rolling. And then there's this amazing pickup game that we have here in the Twin Cities. It's Mojo Kickball, and it's a cross between kickball and dodgeball with a whole bunch of other rules. It's the only pickup game that I love playing because if you work as a team, it like even people who can't run can score. So as long as you work together as a team, everybody can contribute. And I love that. Like having played high level sports, like going and playing pickup rugby can be really frustrating for me because I remember cohesiveness of a team that just like executed amazing, right? But with Mojo Kickball, it's so fun and the people are amazing. A lot of them are improv artists. So they're just really fun, amazing people. And there's a community here in Minnesota and then in Austin, Texas. But if anybody wants to start it, it's amazing. So I just love, yeah, figuring out those sports.
So alley cat, uh, city races
Yeah.
or scavenger hunts, and then Mojo kickball. Those are the two sort of localized Minnesota sports.
Yeah, and I think alley cats probably exist in some of the other big bike cities, maybe like Portland and stuff, but it's I think the history is like the bike couriers racing,
Ah, okay.
and so you have to like go to certain locations and like so-called, pick up a package, and then whoever makes it to the finish line first wins.
So what is it that inspires you or grabs your attention for a new sport? And does that also apply to like non-physical activity related activities?
I mean, I think just out of basic curiosity, like I love learning things. I am definitely a learner, in those personality test things, like that comes out all the time. I love new things. And on the athletics, I do love the strategy. And the way to test that is by going to a new sport and having to learn about it and figure out how to use my strengths to be best at that competition. But also, you know, it can be scary to try new things, right? But I also like to look at it, or I really do look at it as it has no expectations. When I start, like, I showed up to my first log rolling competition, and there was a couple world champion log rollers there. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about beating them, right? But realistically, I don't have the skills to beat a world champion log roller at my first log rolling competition. But I was like, maybe I could. It could happen. They could mess up, but realistically, I can think that way at my first competition because, like, there is no reasonable expectation that I should be exceptional at that at my first competition, right? So I can just show up and perform. Whereas now, ice climbing competitions, I show up and it's like, well, she's already won a gold medal in speed once. Why doesn't she do it again? So there's, you know, there is that expectation outside, but also in my head. Like I have proven that I'm good at this. So now perform. But when you do something new, there's no reasonable expectation to be great at it. And it's freeing to just go and learn and be emotionally unattached to the outcome.
Not to simplify it, but do you have like a rubric or like what is your approach when going into a new sport? Like, is it a lot of research and just observation, or do you just, yeah, I guess I won't try to fill in the gaps, but like, how do you approach a new sport?
Understanding the rules to the sport is really where I start, and understanding how it's scored and that type of thing is really where a lot of the strategy can come in. In log rolling, there's not really that strategy. I mean, log rolling is a true head to head. Two people are on the same log, right? So that person, I do have to like be better on the log than that person. But in the ice climbing competitions, understanding how it's scored. So we have new rules for this year. So this example is not true anymore, but it has been for a very long time. The clips, like the draws that you clip your rope into as you're going up, they are worth whole values like points, like 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the hold that you were on, that you controlled, is worth the decimal place. So if I was on the 5th quick draw, I had clipped my rope through that, I would get a 5 and then decimal point, and if that was the 15th hold, I would have a 5.15. So each incremental hold was worth less than each incremental draw. So you would put more energy into clipping the next draw than getting the next hold previously, right? So that certainly got me through to semifinals a few times where other people like went for the next move, maybe didn't identify the next move was going to be a really hard move. And so they didn't clip the next draw first and then they fell off. Whereas like I clipped the next draw and then did the hard move and fell off. And so that got me through to semifinals. So that strategy, in speed climbing for the ice competitions, it can be understanding what to do when your opponent falls off. So if they fall off, it doesn't mean you automatically win. Like you still have to complete your your climb without falling off. So knowing that you have to be able to do that and in your head adjusting to like a safe version of climbing where you're not going to fall off, right? Or something like that. So knowing what to do and then being able to implement that in the heat of a climb as well is both aspects of the strategy. I always talk about like you need to set yourself up to be successful in the competition or whatever you're doing. And in competition, there's two more important parts of that. One is your routine pre-competition to be able to be prepared to get on the wall and perform well. Another part of strategy is making sure that you understand the uniquenesses of the sport and how to perform that movement. In ice climbing competitions, it's really important to know the holds. And each competition sometimes has new holds that nobody has ever seen, but you need to be able to read the holds and the movement from the ground because we only get a short preview in semifinals and finals. In qualifiers, it is flash format, which means that we get to watch every competitor climb and that there's a video that we get to view beforehand. But in each sport, being able to identify those unique things or those things that you need to know beforehand is part of the strategy. there is always like the physical stuff, but I don't really count that into strategy. Like, I think it's kind of just the given or learning a sport that you need to be able to do the physical moves. Like, that's kind of what a lot of people can do and watch and mimic other people, but the real mental strategy side of it is understanding the sport, understanding if there's a way to get an advantage by being smart and being able to implement it in competition, because that is really where I think the big difference for people is there are a lot of people that can understand the differences, but being able to implement that in the heat of the sport, right? You're up on that climb, you're starting to get pumped, you're not going to be able to hold on to your tools longer or some very much longer. You have to decide, are you going for a clip? Are you going for a hold? Are you like, what's the strategy now that you know you're unlikely to like get to the top or something, right? So that's the strategy that I love and that I'm good at identifying and planning and then implementing in general.
So where are a lot of the dry toolers in the US currently?
We have a couple pockets today, and there's been different pockets over the years too. But we have the Barn, which is a dry tooling gym, semi private in Seattle, but they do have a website. And there's a number of World Cup competitors there and also building a dry tooling community. There's the Coop in Boulder, which is a public dry tooling gym that everybody should check out. Then we also have the Scratch Pad in Salt Lake, and we've got a contingent of dry toolers around there, and they're rebuilding their gym right now, so it's not open, but it will be. Bozeman, Montana, we have Kevin Linlau, and they have a small dry tooling section of a gym up there. Then here in Minneapolis and Minnesota, where I live, we have a few competitions that we host each year, and we don't have any permanent dry tooling. And then Angie Limbach is in Milwaukee, and they dry tool at Turner's Gym, and she has a home wall. And then the Edge Half Moon out in Albany, where we had tryouts this year. Tyler Kempney moved out there recently. And the Northeast has a strong mixed climbing community. And it's exciting that they finally have a gym that they can go to. Petroglyphs always has a competition in Vermont at the Ice Fest. And in Ontario, there's people doing dry tool nights all the time now, which is super awesome. New Jersey has a little contingent, and there's more home dry tooling walls than I always think there are, and I'm always pleasantly surprised to find out where they are. So, yeah, and then Gord MacArthur's up in Cranbrook, and he does some stuff. Canmore has a dry tooling gym. Yeah, they're all over the place, and you can find them online in forums if you want to get going.
I'm gonna throw a little shade as
Yeah.
a as a Massachusetts guy. So the Beast of the East US tryouts and then open competition really turned into sort of like the best of the West.
Well, I mean, it was team tryouts. So everybody was coming. But I mean, Tyler is originally from the East Coast, right? And he's back now and he is proud and trying to make a stand for the East. So you're right. It had a lot more West Coast people, but here's the challenge, Aaron. Make sure it has more East Coast people next year because it's coming back. So, start your team.
I shouldn't really talk. I didn't compete, so who am I to
Well,
to
you
do
can
that?
change that for next year.
Yeah.
That's why, it's an open competition too, because everybody on the team loves to share this with other people. And we just want to get everybody else psyched because it's so fun and so unique.
We actually went into the weeds of sort of how things look a little bit today. Maybe we should back up and talk about how you actually got started in competing in dry tooling and ice climbing competitions.
When I was in grad school out in Rochester, New York, I couldn't play rugby anymore. I'd played my 4 years of collegiate rugby, and we have a climbing gym on the RIT campus called the Red Barn, and my brother already climbed, and he'd taken me rock climbing a few times, trying to make his sister into his belayer, but it never worked for him. And the people and everything just clicked at that time, and then I moved back to Minnesota a year later. A natural thing in Minnesota to when you're a rock climber and winter comes, you become an ice climber, or at least, I love winter sports anyways. So I did that, and then through that, I met some mentors, and they were training for big mixed climbs in the Canadian Rockies, and they had a little home gym in their garage, and we're doing figure fours and just like, being on the wall for 20 minutes and stuff like that. So I started doing that with them. And then I took a job in Calgary, Alberta, and moved to the Canadian Rockies. And there was a gym in Canmore called The Vision, and they had a dry tooling contest each year that was generally just pro climbers that were there for like an ice fest or were locals. And I was like, "Oh, this looks fun. I've been kind of training this." And so I entered and I won. And it wasn't a big field, and I was like, "This is really cool." And so I started asking people, "Where else can I do this?" And two things came up. One, City Rock gym in Colorado Springs also did an ice fest, and they had a one route competition for like the pros kind of as an exhibition thing. And I was like, okay, how do I get into that? And then Ice Climbing World Cup came up. And I was like, okay, that seems to be my only next option. So I guess we're going to figure out what World Cup is. So Gord MacArthur in Cranbrook, British Columbia had gone the year before, and Will Gadd had gone years before. And so I got connected with Gord and trained, and then we showed up in Switzerland in January of I guess we went to Korea first, January of 2012. So it was Korea and then Switzerland and Romania that year too. So yeah, that's how I got into it. And there was really nothing else going on with dry tooling. I mean, I should say the UIAA Ice Fest competition was going on, which, is outdoor mixed climbing to a plywood wall that's on top of the cliff. And there again, that was invite or application only. And it was mostly the sponsored pros that were teaching at Ice Fest. I actually applied for a number of years while I was already competing at World Cup and got denied because I didn't have a name, I didn't have sponsors or anything. And my mentor, Scott Bakkeys, who's a Minnesotan and one of the people that I had trained with, he actually called the organizers and Vince and was like, "You got to let Kendra in. Like, I'm vouching for her." And so that's how I got in to compete with URA. But so we've come so far with just the recognition of dry tooling as, a unique format and something fun to do. Like we've already talked about all these places across the country now. We have some form of dry tooling that you can go try out. And it's just awesome where we've come in the last 11 years.
I guess I can do the math. So 2023 minus 11 would be 2012. So is that when you got started in competition climbing?
Yeah, January of 2012 is when I first went to World Cup. So, 2010 is probably I think it was April of 2010 is when I did that first competition at the Vision in Canmore, and then it took me a year or so to figure it all out.
How many dry toolers would you say there were maybe in the US and Canada or like in your circles at that time?
At the time, most people that were dry tooling were using it as a training tool to do mixed climbing. And even dry tooling outside was much less common. So it was generally mixed climbing. And so mixed climbing is when you have both rock and ice on the climb, and kind of historically started because people looked at like hanging daggers or pillars and stuff, and they were like, oh, well, I want to get to that ice. So I'm going to climb the rock with my ice gear. Like Hafner in the Canadian Rockies is, a historic mixed climbing. Uray is historic mixed climbing, Vail. And Hafner has some just dry routes. So it's just rock that we climb with our dry tools or with our ice tools. And when I moved to Calgary, the playground had been developed. It didn't have as many routes as it does today, and there's multiple more dry tooling only crags, but we could go to the playground shoulder seasons too. There's a lot of rat poop around, so it's pretty gross to go in the summer, but you can. And so like that was pretty new and developing, just the idea that we can go do it without ice. And yeah, I loved it. I do love ice climbing. I'm a huge ice climber too. So, it's not one or the other. They're very unique. Yeah, there's not very many people at that time that are into the competition dry tooling. And to go to make it stronger than that, when I started going to World Cup and talking to outdoor brands, they had a pretty negative view of competition climbing and dry tooling. It was like, why don't you go real climb? I'm like, well, I do that too. But it was really seen as a less than thing, even though, it was on this world stage.
What was your first experience like at the World Cup? So you said it was in Korea and then Switzerland and then Romania.
Romania might have been I don't remember what order it was that year, but yeah, we definitely went to all of those places. Korea was definitely first. And we showed up in Korea. I had traveled in Asia a little bit, and I'd traveled a lot growing up. So I was lucky where travel was comfortable for me. And in Korea, it was a great first one because you catch a bus near the airport, and then they bus you, the 3-4 hours to Cheongsong where the structure is and the World Cup takes place. And you stay in a hotel there that's all organized for you. And then they bus you to and from the competition structure and the hotel. And everything's just really arranged for you. They feed you and everything. So that was a really great first one to go to because we didn't have to figure out a lot of logistics. We just had to fly in and out of Seoul. And it was a little intimidating. I mean, not everybody spoke English of the competitors, but a lot of people did. And I made friends with the Bulgarian team and they took me under their wing. But, everybody was pretty friendly. The World Cup ice climbing community is small and it's very supportive. It's, we refer to it as the World Cup family. And it really is. For years I traveled with like whole groups from other countries and we all cheer for each other, and it is game faith when you're there in isolation and climbing. But the beauty of climbing competition too is that we could all climb our best climb that day. Like just, if I climb the best I could ever climb, that doesn't stop somebody else from also climbing the best that they can. Whereas, sports like soccer or football and stuff, like one team literally has to lose in a direct head to head game, right? So it does make it easier in climbing to like truly want the best for the other people that you're competing with because it doesn't negate your best. The experience was just really great meeting everybody. I hope that the new athletes have similar experiences as they're coming in. And I always try to make sure that that's happening as well.
From what I recall, you didn't know that speed climbing was a discipline until that first event, right?
Yeah. I had maybe seen it on the registration, but at the time, there was very few videos out there of what World Cup climbing was at all. And we were certainly not live streaming things like we are today. Lead difficulty definitely gets a lot more publicity than speed does in the climbing world. So, yeah, when we were in Korea, I saw the speed wall, the Bulgarians participate in it and everything. So they told me about it. It was too late to sign up for it by the time like I saw it. But when we got to Switzerland, I signed up for it. I'm a sprinter. My body type is sprinting. And so I was like, yeah, sign me up for speed. I got to use the Bulgarians speed tools. They're unique. They're much shorter and very sharp and have a very downturned angle, like an ice pick. And so you don't swing them, you just like body weight them as you sprint up the vertical ice. So not surprisingly to me, was pretty good at it. In my second run, we got 3 runs and your fastest time counts. And in my second run, I did like one tool slipped halfway up and came towards my leg. And I thought that I had like caught it soon enough that I had maybe just grazed the skin on my leg. And so didn't think anything about it. I finished my run, came down, and I was sitting and waiting for my third run because you like cycle through all the female competitors for each run. And so I'm sitting there, put my hands like on the top of my knees, and I'm like, oh, my pants are wet. And I look at my hand and it's red. So I had indeed stabbed myself in the meat of my thigh above my knee, and it was a clean stab wound. I took my third run, didn't do great at it because now I already knew I was bleeding. And then I went to the medic tent and they kind of cleaned it up and were like, okay, just let it heal. If it gets infected, go to the doctor. And it didn't. Don't even really have any scar tissue there anymore 11 years later. But I still loved the speed. So every competition after that, I would sign up for it. And the Russians dominate in speed climbing. And like at the time, there was like the Bulgarians and me that were non-Russians that were even participating in speed anymore. Everybody else had just given up. And so the Russians were actually really, really supportive. And they're like, yes, yes, we want competition. Like, and they would help me and give me tips and encouragement. They were so encouraging and everything. So that was just really awesome. And that really is a perfect example of the community.
Well, I'm gonna fast forward a little bit because within 3 years, you ended up competing in speed on American soil, and what happened?
Yeah, we had World Cup in Bozeman, Montana, which was awesome. And I won the gold at speed. So it was really exciting. We had something like 28 Americans competed in speed because we were the host country at the time. We got a bunch of extra spots for athletes. So if I remember correctly, we could have 18 women and 18 men. And I was super trained that year. I was living, in Calgary and going to Canmore all the time and ice climbing. And I actually had been, because we get ice so early up in the Canadian Rockies, I was able to just do tons of laps on the natural ice with my speed tools. I, you know, was very trained that year and it paid off.
Where did you get those speed tools from?
Yes, Vasily, one of the Russian competitors who's a strong climber and he coaches too, and he route sets as well now. We're leaving Europe and he hands me these tools and crampons and gives them to me and says like, so you can keep getting better. That was an amazing gift that he gave me and really definitely jump started US speed climbing.
I feel like you had quite an advantage in that competition being, like, the only person in North America with speed tools.
Yes. Um, in terms of speed climbing, absolutely. And URA has always had a speed competition, which is like a full 20-meter pitch or more. And everybody's always done it with their normal ice climbing tools. And So I also showed up with speed tools and like blew everybody out of the water that first year that I competed. And I think almost mostly now everybody who competes does use speed tools in URA too, because it's just so much faster. But like in the final, I beat one of the Russian women that were there. So like, yes, we were on US soil and there was a lot of Americans competing, but also all the Europeans and Asians had come over as well for the World Cup.
I think that's one of the interesting dynamics of this sport is you do get to meet athletes from a lot of different countries. And in today's political climate, like how would you really have an opportunity to meet Russian competitors otherwise? And I think it's something that is particularly important to you, right?
Yeah, I think it's so valuable for everybody in the world to build relationships with people from other countries and especially like significantly different countries. And especially with the multiple wars that we have going on around the world and everything and all the history, there is still very strong nationalist biases around the world. And learning that people are just people and living their lives just like us. I mean, different ways of living their lives, but that we have so much in common. And we have friends in Russia who, they have propaganda going on there being like, the Americans hate all Russians, like all Russian people as well. And like they're playing that on TV. And then, we have propaganda going on here too that's maybe not as strong. But, we had friends that were like, hesitant about maybe talking to us or, and we like reassured them that like, no, we are not against you. We are against Putin and what, your military is doing, but we recognize that this is not you or friends. But there is also some harder discussions in that. We also have Ukrainian athletes and Russia took, invaded and occupied Crimea, which is part of their country, and then invaded again. And it is, they, as much as they are friends with the Russian athletes, it's also their lives and their hometowns. And they're like, no, we can't let the Russians like come and participate because we need to have those sanctions to try to change something in Russia, right? And so it has been a really hard decision to not have our Russian friends involved in World Cup, but that's the reality of the world that we're living in today. It's also, you know, great that we have those personal relationships and, the Iranian team started coming in, I don't know if it was like 2013 or 2014, and it was really awesome to be able to meet those athletes, and it took a while too to like become friends with them and be able to like have open conversations, but it's been so great to learn about their lives and then them also to learn about my life without the stereotype of an American and stuff. But so, the Azerbaijan team came sometime after that as well. We have Mongolians that China started hosting World Cups. And I had been traveling to China for work at that point, but it was awesome to introduce China not as a stereotype to like my American friends. And, it's a huge country that's very varied as well and is awesome. Yeah, I really, really cherish the relationships and the opportunity to build those relationships that World Cup has provided. And that's a big motivator to keep doing it. I do love this style of climbing. So like I love doing that, but the World Cup camaraderie and family is really a big motivation to keep doing it for so long.
You've been competing for the better part of a decade. How have things changed or how has the sport progressed in that time?
So many more people are aware of the sport and interested in the sport as well as participating in it. I went from being the only American competing in 2012 to today our team is 30 people roughly, including multiple youth competitors. And, we only have 6 spots per gender at each World Cup. And we max that out and there's more people that, you know, qualified to go. So that's just the biggest difference. But also the acceptance of the sport. I talked before about the outdoor industry being pretty discouraging when I started and talked to them. And today, RAB sponsors the team with uniforms, and there's companies that are making dry tooling specific holds and tools and everything. And so there's just been a lot of development, but I would still love to see it grow more and be more available to people to try out.
Let me stir the pot a little bit if I can.
Yeah.
Why do you think the US is behind in competition ice climbing compared to some other major climbing countries?
We definitely have some challenges. We don't have like a permanent structure to practice on. We don't have World Cups consistently. All the athletes pay their own way for the most part with very little support and everything. So you're right. We are behind some people whose like alpine federations completely pay for their travel, and France and Switzerland and Korea all have, and Russia have permanent structures. But we do have an alpine federation that recognizes us, which there are countries that don't. We don't have competitors from Germany or Austria because their federations don't support competition climbing at all. So we are better off than other countries, and we've come a long way. But we also have unique challenges because of how large our country is. Many of the other countries, their teams can drive only a couple hours to get together and practice together, whereas we have people on both coasts that are on our national team. And so, everybody had to go to New York for team tryouts, which was quite a bit of commitment for many of the competitors. So our space, like how spread out we are, is a unique challenge for us. And then the other thing is like all these structures that are around the world, like some like the Russians and the Iranians are always like, Kendra, just build a structure. Why don't you have a structure? And I'm like, well, liability. Somebody has to have the insurance and everything. It's not just the money to build the structure, which is expensive, but it's really like, how do we maintain that, and how, who's taking the liability in our society, which unfortunately is a lot harder thing to do here in the US than in most parts of the rest of the world. And so, that is just a huge hindrance for us, is the American liability system and everybody's fear of getting sued.
That is an interesting dynamic, how litigious the US system is and how like hesitant a lot of climbing gyms are just to even host dry tooling nights just because of that factor.
Yeah, and I work with multiple gyms and they think their insurance covers it. So I think that gyms often use that as an excuse to not take on something extra. And so many gyms have been very busy. So I understand that to an extent. But like climbing gyms and guide agencies have insurance that will cover this. It's just a matter of getting them to take on the logistics of it, or being willing to support it. And it's doable. It's just harder, right? Like everybody worries about, if you just build a structure in your backyard and start having competitions and stuff, there's more liability here. Like anybody can sue, right? Like in Korea, it's my understanding of the legal system that individuals can't sue. You can go to the legal system and say, I've been wronged and get them to sue, but you can't just file a civil case, which, we can here. And it's not, the problem is not so much being found negligent or anything. It's about the legal fees that you have to pay just to fight it. And that can be prohibitive, risk your assets. So yeah, it's really hard. And I mean, and having a structure too, it's interesting. In Russia, one of their structures is built on the underside of a ski jump. So, we've approached a lot of places in the US that have ski jumps or old ski jumps and everything. And two sides of it. One is the liability of having this structure that can sit there. To be protected, you've got to have a fence and you need to have a certified person running it when people are there and stuff like that. So there's that liability. And then also that we're just still so small and we don't really bring profits to events. So, we need somebody who sees us as a good marketing tool, not as the main money maker. So we can overcome these challenges. And, I think that it does take the community coming together, especially with the companies that are starting to sell in this market and everything. And so I think that's, we need to come together and have a plan to develop this sport further in the US.
This is a Tom Burney question. He was actually curious about the economics of organizing events that you do. He was curious, how much do economics factor in, and are they sustainable?
In general, they're not sustainable today. So at a minimum, I like pay for my own travel and food and everything. At the worst, I literally subsidize some of the competitions by like paying money. Um, I own 300 dry tooling holds. Like I was just thinking the other day that I need to add up what the value of those are, but it's $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, something like that. And that's a consumable, right? They wear out and or we break them. So like I bring that to competitions. More recently, we've just been doing the local ones so that like my travel time and everything is it's just gas and my truck. And then I stay with friends. Did one out in Chapel Hill at the university and like I paid for my airfare out there. And then they put me up at a friend's house. But they're not sustainable today. But that's also most of them are pretty inexpensive entrance fees because we're trying to get everybody involved. And convincing people to pay $25 or $35 to come try it out is easier than the 65 or 70. The other thing is that I spend a day or two putting all these routes up. We have the competition, and then in general, they get stripped right away because the gyms don't keep any routes up. And so it's double labor, right? Like they're stripping the wall, I'm setting, then we strip again, and then they have to reset. And there's labor costs involved with that as well. So we need more gyms that would like to keep up dry tooling, and then it becomes a little bit less of a burden. And we need to get to a point where we can charge the same as rock climbing competitions, at least. We're not there. And so yeah, today it's not. And even like World Cup, it's hard to monetize just as an event organizer. Like in Switzerland, it's a small ski town, and so all the hotels and restaurants and everything are getting the business. So the town has a tourism tax, and that tourism tax helps fund World Cup. And then they also sell food and alcohol and everything, and that money helps fund it. So like they really use the competition as the marketing for everybody else, all the other businesses. And so that's really the economics of making a lot of these events sustainable and viable is really pairing them with other things or in locations where people can benefit from them type of thing. You can't just directly charge people enough to come watch this unique sport. Yeah, so the economics of it are hard and also athletes aren't sponsored in general. So you have to entice the athletes to spend the money to come compete.
Well, thank you for all that you're doing.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I love it. Like, it's a lot of fun, but it does get a little repetitive trying to make headway some days, but it also helps to talk about far we have come.
Do you have an idea for what it will take to get to a tipping point? Dry toolers in the country or number of gyms that are operating, just to sort of like move it to where it is more sustainable to have competitions and things like that?
That's a great question. I don't know that I have a metric where that tipping point really is, but I do think having a permanent structure that is a good training ground for World Cups will be a major win because we'll be able to have more training, like camps and things like that. We could hold competitions on that. I'm working really hard to bring dry tooling to more gyms. And right now I'm really focusing on universities because in general, they are excited to offer a unique experience to their students. So that's where I've been focusing, and we're definitely making some headway. And I'm excited to see next year how many different universities will have competitions at. But also, maybe as commercial gyms slow down, or like we have enough of them to support the community, that more gyms like the Edge in Albany will be interested in having consistent dry tooling and things like that as a way to keep or get members. And access to do the sport is our hindrance. At the beginner level, we will get significantly more people involved when we have rope climbing versus the dry tooling gyms that we have today are bouldering. And it's just a little more intimidating, inaccessible than, being on a rope. So those to me, those are the things that will get us to that tipping point is space to do our sport.
You're on the board of USA Ice Climbing, competitor and on the board. Um, what's next for comp ice climbing in the US, do you think?
Well, a lot of us are really focused on just what I was talking about, developing our beginner competitions and explaining the sport to more people. Beyond that, there are some people that continue to work on more World Cups in the US. We do have a World Cup in Edmonton in February, so that's exciting to have one in North America. And also, maybe bringing some different formats back. It's my passion to bring back speed difficulty. So we actually did this, like the Teva Mountain Games did it back in the day when they had ice climbing for 1 year. And we did it in Bozeman as well for the North American Championship. And it was so fun. You have two, it's like the Seco block competitions, it's big, huge bouldering competitions where they're falling into the water. So it's the same concept, but we're on a rope. So you have two exact routes and then you're climbing them head to head, but you're also on lead. It's difficulty. It's not just the speed. It was so fun as a competitor because you're still doing all the unique movements of dry tooling and everything, but you're having to move fast. You're climbing the same route multiple times. So you're getting better at it, but then also maybe you start taking more risk, like maybe try to skip moves or just moving faster. And I think it's really great for spectators too. I think difficulty has a little bit of a viewership problem because even though all these people are my friends, I do not want to watch, 40 people climb the same route. And so let alone, like random spectators don't want to do that. So, if it's head to head, it's more exciting. So, I would love to have a place to be able to do that, to host a competition like that and try to bring that format back in to more things because I think that that would be a good future for our sport. USA Ice Climbing, we are trying to figure out what's next and how we develop the organization more. The American Alpine Club is our governing body because they are the UIAA member federation, and the UIAA is the international body for competition ice climbing. The American Alpine Club supports us, now more than they did before. Back in 2012, I had to call and explain to them what it was and why they had to register me, and I couldn't register myself. Their organization is not set up to be a sport governing body. So we have to figure out the relationship or other resources to be able to have a group that is really focused on development of the sport. And so that's a challenge just from people and money and logistics with the Alpine Club and everything. So that's something that we're working through. And we're always psyched to have people with skills or vision get involved too. So, I because I've come out of retirement here, we really don't have any retired athletes that are like on the organization side now. We just have current athletes and then like peripheral people that are supporting us, that are involved. But we're such a new sport, we don't have all these experienced people that can now spend their time doing administrative organizing. So, yeah, that's a challenge.
If listeners want to be able to support some of the efforts that you're doing or Team USA ice climbing, are there particular resources or places that you'd offer for people to go to check out, learn more, and then donate?
Yeah, the American Alpine Club has a page that talks about the team, also has a donation space for that. So all of the money that gets donated through the American Alpine Club does come to the athletes that are going to World Cups this year. You can also get to that link through usaiceclimbing.org. And that website is pretty basic right now, but you can get to that donation page. Also, go to iceclimbing.sport, which is the UIAA's website specifically for Ice Climbing World Cup. There's a lot of resources on there about what the competitions are and links to all the live streaming and the results and everything. So that's a great resource for people, and watch those live streams and share those with other people, expose other people to the sport and its exciting uniqueness. And then you can also follow the team on USA Ice Climbing on Instagram and Facebook. We're going to be ramping up posts as we head into the competition season, and that will link to all the other athletes' individual social media accounts. And, feel free to message me or anybody else in the competition world because everybody's really psyched on this format and sharing it. And we'd be excited to bring other people into the family.
Thank you so much for chatting today, Kendra.
Thank you, Aaron. It's exciting to talk about all of this and share it with everybody. I appreciate your platform.
If you'd like to bring a dry tooling comp to your university or local gym, consider hiring Kendra. You can connect with her on Instagram at Kendra Stritch. That is KendraStritch. To follow along with USA Ice Climbing, their IG handle is, I don't know why I said IG instead of Instagram, is USA Ice Climbing _. Don't forget the underscore. And their website is usaiceclimbing.org. O-R-G. If you're feeling generous and would like to donate to the team, since all the athletes have to pay their own way to events, you can find a donate link on the website.